Good evening, councillors, staff and members of the public. Welcome to the City's Public Agenda Briefing Forum. My name is Councillor Cameron Blair and I will be chairing this forum. We wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on, the Whadjuk of the Noongar people. We wish to acknowledge their elders past, present and future, and respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to the life of this city and this region. The operation of this forum is in accordance with the city's adopted public agenda briefing forum policy and procedures, and is governed by the provisions of the Local Government Act, Standing Orders and Rules of Conduct. This agenda briefing forum will provide the opportunity for elected members to be informed and seek additional information on matters prior to the presentation of these items to the next ordinary council meeting for consideration and discussion. This meeting is also live streamed and I would like to welcome those watching remotely. I thank you for your interest. Attendance, apologies and leave of absence.
Through the Chair, we have an apology from Councillor Sewell tonight.
Declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest?
No.
Announcements by the member presiding without discussion? No. Public question time. Do we have any questions from the public?
We haven't received any. Is there any questions in the audience? We do have some deputations to ask throughout the report items though.
Public statement time.
No.
Public submissions received in writing.
No.
Petitions received.
No.
Confidential items announced but not discussed.
The only item is listed on page 9.1, yep. Item 10.26, so that can't be discussed publicly.
Okay, thank you. Reports to Council, Development Service Reports. 10.1.1, Draft Activity Centre Strategy. Presentation by Director Peter Varelis.
Through the Chair. Thank you. Good evening, councillors and community and stakeholders in attendance. This evening, Development Services will be presenting on 4 items, being the Activity Centre Strategy, Local Planning Policy 32, Public Open Space for Public Advertising, the Development Services Regulatory Services Update for the second half of last year, and a revocation of a local planning policy in relation to telecommunications infrastructure. First presentation for this evening is on the Activity Centre Strategy for consideration of submissions and proposed modifications for final adoption. What is the Activity Centre Strategy? The activity centres are focal points of the community. They vary in size and function, and they generally are serviced by transport networks primarily made up of roads and footpaths. The City presented to Council last year an Activity Centre Strategy for public advertising, and that document was adopted. The strategy helps guide, for the purposes of public advertising, the strategy helps guide future planning, development and land use decisions relevant to activity centres, and considers, amongst other things, changes and growth in population, the hierarchy of the centres throughout the city, having regard for state planning policy, the equitable distribution of services and facilities amongst the city, to improve aesthetics, the private and public realm within those various activity centres, and to reflect best practice land use planning and the requirements of the state planning framework. In terms of the hierarchy of centres, centres are generally made up of district, neighbourhood, local and convenience centres. The city has 2 district centres in Kalamunda and Forestfield, and they are typically around 15 to 25,000 square metres in retail floor space. The city's district centres are in the lower range of that bracket. They service the daily and weekly needs of residents and a local focus on reflective of the demographics. So depending on the area that centre services, the makeup of the services within that centre are generally reflective of that. They are anchored by at least one full-line supermarket and sometimes a discount department store. Neighbourhood centres are typically around 4,500 to 6,000 square metres, and they have a limited role in providing convenience retail and community facilities for the immediate surrounding catchment, typically anchored by a single limited line supermarket. Neighbourhood centres within the city, as an example, would be where the Aldi is located in Wattle Grove and where the Foodworks is located in Forestfield. Local activity centres are less than 1,500 square metres in retail floor space, and they consist of a small group of shops and serve local walkable catchments. Some examples of those would be where the Embers restaurant's located in Gooseberry Hill on Railway Road. There's also convenience centres, and they provide day-to-day convenience need of local communities. An example of that would be the Wollaston Deli. The document, as mentioned, was publicly advertised. There was also a survey that accompanied the advertising of the strategy. We had 17 survey responses and 13 written submissions. Some of the key matters that were raised, the details are outlined within the report, but some of the key matters that were raised was the establishment of an activity centre at Midland Road, that's the corner of Midland and Kalamunda Road, can occur without negative impacts on surrounding activity centres, and that was supported by some commentary around and retail analysis. Support to commence the preparation of the activity centre plan for the Forestfield District Centre, a desire to see improvements to activity centres in High Wycombe, particularly along Kalamunda Road, which ties in nicely with the city's Kalamunda Road Streetscape Improvement Project. Provide greater opportunities for cycling access to centres, provide enhanced tourism and aged care opportunities, and a focus on existing centres rather than expanding to new. In regards to responses to those matters that were raised through the advertising process, some of the key modifications included the updating of names of some of the activity centres to have a consistent naming convention, to more easily understand the centre's location and better distinguish between the different centres within the same locality. Some convenience centres were picked up that weren't included within the initial draft document, and those are outlined on the screen. There was also updated demographic information that has been assimilated within the documentation. That updated demographic information didn't provide any significant modifications in regards to the retail analysis, and we outlined key considerations for the potential future neighbourhood centre on Midland Road at the corner of Midland Road and Kalamunda Road. Some of the key actions and strategies within the documentation, as mentioned, the site at the corner of Midland and Kalamunda Road is to be considered as a neighbourhood activity centre subject to a retail sustainability assessment, or what they now call within the new draft state planning policy an impact test. Consider the review and preparation of public realm improvement plans for our neighbourhood centres, and investigate the need for a car parking strategy, which would primarily be focused on the city's district centres, but also provide guidance in terms of reciprocal parking arrangements for developments that seek dispensation. And the potential future activity centres identified for High Wycombe South, where the new station is being constructed, at Wattle Grove South or Crystalbrook, and Maida Vale South being subject to community engagement and further detailed planning and retail analysis that will come through those specific structure planning processes. The recommendation is that Council notes the outcomes from community engagement, and that's comprehensively documented within the attachments accompanied to the report, and to adopt the activity centre strategy as proposed to be modified in accordance with the schedule of modifications that's accompanied with the report, and notes that the strategy will undergo some minor design and formatting improvements through the insertion of infographics and the like as part of its finalisation. That's reflective of the various graphs and statistics that are in the document. Any queries or questions?
We have a member of the gallery who would like to speak, Aaron Lohman. If you could come up to the seat up the front, please.
Thank you, Council, for the opportunity to speak to the matter tonight. My name's Aaron Lohman from Element. I'm here representing Hawaiian, who are the owner of Hawaiian's Forestfield which is the Forestfield District Centre. On behalf of Hawaiian, we made a submission on the activity centre strategy, and in that regard, Hawaiian generally supports the recommendations put forward in the ACS in respect to the Forestfield District Centre. The preparation of an activity centre structural plan for Forestfield is foreshadowed within the ACS, and that is supported and is considered important by Hawaiian as a planning tool assisting in securing the ongoing viability and sustainability of the centre, and Hawaiian's very supportive of the commencement of activity structure planning, commencing potentially 2021-2022. As part of the submission we made on behalf of Hawaiian, we requested that the current retail floor space of 17,000 square metres for the district centre be increased to 20,000 square metres, which is consistent with the current version of SPP 4.2 activity centres, and that floor space to be allocated to Hawaiian's Forestfield to provide for coordinated and consolidated development. We understand that the 20,000 square metres of additional, or not of additional, the 20,000 square metres maximum floor space has been supported in the report to be allocated more broadly to the district centre, and that is followed through as a modification to the strategy. We also note that the ultimate shop floor space, retail floor space in the district centre will be determined through a retail sustainability assessment in the proposed activity centre plan. The envisaged floor space in the activity centre strategy should be considered as a guide, given further detailed analysis will occur through the ACP. One other key concern for our client has been out of centre development, which is essentially commercial shop retail development occurring outside the designated hierarchy of existing centres. We asked that some text be inserted into the strategy to address that concern. We note that there has been some modification to the strategy proposed in that respect, and potential policy flagged to deal with out-of-centre development as well. We note since the time though of lodging our submission, the draft activity centre the draft SPP 4.2 has been released for public consultation, which recently closed on the 3rd of May, and that provides some additional stringent controls, or more stringent controls I should say, on out-of-centre development. Nonetheless, the City's officer's position on it is supported, and we thank them for that. Other than that, we thank the Council I should say, for the opportunity to make a submission on the ACS and the opportunity to make a public statement tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. Any questions from Councillor?
Yeah, just
Councillor.
Aaron, you said that you might have an expansion down the track. Which way do you want to expand within that car park?
We were foreshadowing that the activity centre strategy foreshadows a local planning process or an activity centre plan for the centre. In terms of which way we may expand or which way Hawaiian wants to expand, I can't offer any advice on that at this point in time.
Thank you, Aaron. Item 10.1.2, drafting local... Mr. Forrest.
Sorry, I didn't realise we were so formal as to be going through it like a council meeting, but just like to comment on the presentation, several aspects. Number one, the activity strategy, it says, the activity centre strategy will inform the future planning and land use directions and influence economic and employment growth within the City of Kalamunda. Number one, I think that is false, because it's based on outdated guidance from the Planning Commission, dating 2010. Since then, there's been huge amount of economic change, generally, and the papers don't show that there's research being undertaken with regard to that. So, first of all, I'm saying that it won't inform what it says it will in the summary. Secondly, it's misled the community in seeking comment on an outdated brief from the Planning Commission, as they've issued a new activity centre plan for comment to public, and it's closed now. So that should have been advised to the community, but it wasn't. And so I recommend to that the council doesn't adopt the strategy pending consideration of the brief, which is a new brief from the Planning Commission.
Thanks for your comments, Peter. Our Director would like to make a comment and respond. Can we turn that mic off, please?
Through the chair, thank you for your comments there, Mr. Forrest. Paragraph 68 of the officer report does make reference to the draft planning framework that's been advertised in regards to centres planning. The new draft state planning policy 4.2, which has been recently advertised, has been factored into the content of the strategy. It is not considered necessary to defer the finalisation of the strategy because of the draft SPP. Analysis of the draft indicates that there are no major departures from current centres planning across the metropolitan area, and as such, this documentation can continue through its process.
Thank you, Director. On to item 10.1.2, Draft Local Planning Policy 32, Public Open Space for Public Advertising, a presentation by Chris Lodge.
Good evening, councillors and community. The purpose of this item is to consider the adoption of Local Planning Policy number 32 for the purposes of public advertising, and this policy's stem from a recommendation of the Public Open Space Strategy back in 2018 that was adopted, and hence the city has progressed the policy to tonight. The overall purpose is to ensure planning provides for adequate and well-distributed public open space throughout the city of Kalamunda. It's fit for purpose, sustainably developed, and especially considering the city takes on the liability of maintaining public open space in the long term. Some of the details of the policy provides guidance for the city's officers, for council, for applicants and any interested stakeholders in the development of public open space. There's provisions within the policy that deal with both existing public open space and where that might be impacted by proposals, and new public open space being planned through structure planning and subdivision processes. It deals with public open space requirements and information necessary at various stages of the planning process, especially subdivision process, which is when public open space is seeded. It provides some guidance around allocation, location, and design of public open space. It includes a fairly detailed schedule of development expectations for public open space. Again, that can be considered for existing and proposed public open space in the city. And it also includes recommendations around the threshold at which the city may recommend that cash in lieu be taken instead of land being taken through the subdivision process. It includes some flow diagrams around process, dealing with what I just mentioned around cash in lieu, and taking land and land areas and thresholds that we've considered are appropriate for taking land as opposed to cash. It includes some recommendations around how POS is designed, and some guidance around how it's handed over to the city. It's very localised in that regard. There are a number of state level guidance documents and policies, livable neighbourhoods and subdivisional guidelines. However, they're quite high level, so this policy fills the gap at the local level. The recommendation tonight is to adopt it for public advertising for a period of 21 days. Any questions?
Councillors, any questions?
I note that it says if the 10% of land is too small, then we use cash in lieu. What do you consider too small? Like, just what does it need to be to not be too small?
The policy includes some guidance in terms of land areas. So for 4,000 square metres through to 10,000 square metres, the city would have to apply discretion and consider a number of factors. It usually comes down to whether or not that space is usable in the long term, whether or not it's needed in the locality, having regard to the quantum of land currently available and the community needs. So you'd look to the public open space strategy for guidance in that regard. So the policy does make that link back to the strategy.
Thank you.
Through the chair, just to provide a bit more information on that, as Chris stated, between 4,000 square metres and 1 hectare, 10,000 square metres, there is a general presumption against ceding of land for public open space. And that's because of the economies of scale in regards to the size of the site and the city's maintenance requirements. So there is a general presumption against, but as Chris highlighted, there are some provisos within the policy where in certain circumstances where we may consider public open space less than 1 hectare.
Any questions from the gallery? Question, Councillor Boyd.
Yeah, thank you. I noted there was one of your little bubbles indicated that public open space it stated something like accessible to all and well maintained or something similar. Is the onus on the city to ensure that that occurs?
Yeah, the public open space strategy looks at the quality of various parcels around the city. It grades public open space based on where additional resources might be required and also where there's maybe deficiencies in certain localities. So that strategy does aim to target certain areas so that we can apply resources accordingly. There is a general presumption that we will improve public open space over time as the community grows and as maintenance is required and renewal is required.
Any further questions? Councillor Jardina.
I think Chris, or the councillors need to understand that it's not just a public open space where there's playing that you can do all that stuff. We also have passive public open space that people don't want touched. So I think that you've got to be mindful of that too.
Any questions from the gallery? No questions. Thank you, Chris. Item 10.1.3, Development Services, Regulatory Service Update, July-December 2020, presentation by Director Peter Varelis. It will be Director of Development Services, Andrew Flower-Tutt. Manager,
correct.
Oh, it says Director, yeah. Lucky you.
Lucky me, yes. Good evening, councillors and members of the public. First item I'm talking on tonight is the Development Services Regulatory Service Update for July-December 2020. The purpose of this item is to provide a half-yearly update on the regulatory services provided by the City of Kalamunda with respect to the approval services, environmental health, community safety for the period July 2020 to December 2020. Importantly, reporting on the regulatory services of development services promotes transparency and accountability in the function and operation of approval services, environmental health and community services. So looking at statutory planning, for the 6-month period, the City processed a total of 396 development applications. Of these, 377 or 95% were assessed within the statutory timeframe. Just looking at the table shown there, it obviously identifies 2 principal types of applications: standard development applications, which are applications which do not require any formal advertising, and we have a 60-day statutory timeframe in which to assess those applications, and what we call complex development applications, which will require advertising that requires a 90-day statutory timeframe for approval. What the table doesn't indicate is the fact the city also has what we call fast-track applications. These are, there's no statutory obligation on the city to actually undertake these, but these are applications we deal with within what we call a 20-day timeframe. During that period, 92 applications were processed, and of these 84% were processed within that 20-day timeframe. The 396 development applications processed represents an increase of 189 or 48% on the number of applications received for the previous 6-month period. Moving on to building, for the same period, a total of 559 certified and uncertified building permits were processed within the statutory timeframe. This figure compares with the 489 permits processed with the same period for January, or for the previous period, January to June 2020. As it can be seen from that table, the building department is achieving a high level of statutory compliance with respect to its processing timeframes. Moving on to the customer survey responses for the same period. Now, this is something the city's been doing now for the last 18 months, so essentially every application approval that goes out, we send a customer survey response with, just to get general feedback on how the planning team and the building team is performing in terms of its customer service. I'm not aware of any other local authority that actually does this, so the survey results we get back are very informative and help us moving forward with any improvements. But for that period, the city for statutory planning received a total of 55 responses that were related to the principal question of the level of service provided. Of the 55 responses, 80% stated they were either satisfied, very satisfied, or neutral, with 20% indicating they were unsatisfied or very unsatisfied, and that chart details those results. Of the 20% or 11 responses that were received that were unsatisfied with the service that we provided, we always review the feedback that we get, but it's evident that the negative feedback really just relates to the time it's taking to process our development applications. And as Council would have seen on the previous slides, we are achieving a high level of statutory compliance with respect to our processing timeframe. So in order to get a bit of an understanding about what the community thinks is an acceptable timeframe, we've amended our landowner survey form to basically ask them what they consider to be an appropriate timeframe. So I'm hopeful for when we report on the next 6 months timeframe, we'll have a bit of an indication as to what residents, developers consider to be an appropriate timeframe for processing our planning applications. Moving on to building, again for the same period, a total of 47 responses relating to the principal question of level of service were received. Of these, 83% stated they were either satisfied, very satisfied, or neutral, with 17% indicating they were very unsatisfied or unsatisfied. Again, the concerns related to the processing timeframes. Building is slightly different to planning, depending on the nature of the application, but generally they have to process applications within a 10 or 25 day time frame. And those charts there just indicating the responses we got back. That's it from statutory planning and building. I'll just hand over to Peter just a bit.
Through the chair, I'll take the second half of the regulatory update, which relates to environmental health and community safety services. In regards to environmental health assessments, for the July to December 2020 period, the environmental health team undertook 392 food safety risk assessments, which is a 91% increase from the previous reporting period. But it's important to note that many food businesses and public buildings were closed for periods during the first half of last year because of the COVID restrictions, and that's reflected in those statistics. Other environmental health matters. Responses were provided to a variety of other matters. These include technical health advice on 353 planning and building referrals, administering 550 aerobic treatment unit maintenance reports. Aerobic treatment units are in essence septic tank systems, and over 100 food stall approvals and 28 event applications. Other matters included 9 COVID-19 safe event plans, so we assisted with assessing those, which are all required for events over 500 persons. Both slides have a pie chart breakdown of the other assessments and other matters that were dealt with and are detailed within the report. In regards to community safety is made up of fire prevention and ranger services. The community safety team continue to respond to a significant amount of dog and fire-related matters. There have been a 37% increase in the amount of dog-related and 40% increase in fire-related matters since the last reporting period. A slight decrease in parking and vehicle-related matters, whereas CCTV, alarms and litter remain relatively consistent. Noticeably, the COVID-19 patrols had ceased, considering that public gathering restrictions and the like had returned back to normal. But during the previous period, there was a significant number of patrols and the like that were undertaken, assisting with ensuring that restrictions were complied with. In terms of cautions and infringements, the pie chart on the right is a summary of the number of cautions or infringements issued for the period, with 67% represented to dog-related matters and 28% for parking offences. Bushfire made up 5% of all infringements and cautions, and cats only 3.5%. The recommendation is for Council to note the Development Services regulatory update for that period, and Council will be presented the same regulatory update for this coming period. Any questions?
Just to satisfy my curiosity, Director, the 21 other animals that were listed as having an infringement against them, could you give us some background as to what those 21 little pickles might be?
Through the Chair, they could range from rooster complaints, to which we have been dealing with one lately, and goats, sheep and other animals.
Any further questions from councillors? Any questions from the gallery? Nothing further. We'll move on to the next item from the manager, Andrew. Revocation, item 10.1.4, revocation of Local Planning Policy 6.
Thank you. So the purpose of this item is a proposal to revoke Local Planning Policy 6, dealing with telecommunication infrastructure. This policy was adopted in July 2006 with the intent to provide a clear and consistent framework to guide the assessment and determination of development applications proposing telecommunication infrastructure. That said, all the provisions contained in LPP 6 are generally consistent with provisions contained in State Planning Policy 5.2 telecommunications infrastructure. Therefore, the local planning policy is considered redundant and is recommended for revocation. So this table basically talks to the various provisions contained within the local planning policy and the state planning policy, and identifies where there's emissions in one and not the other. But essentially, looking at the top there, we've got electromagnetic emissions. Now, essentially, every carrier must comply with licensing conditions established by the Australian Communications and Media Authority. These conditions in turn mandate certain health exposure limits, which have been established by the federal government. But in essence, what that means is that the federal government, in determining these health exposure limits, have undertaken various surveys and determined there's no current medical advice that suggests that the electromagnetic emissions from these facilities are likely to have an adverse impact on the health of surrounding landowners. And hence that's why we don't establish through either the state planning policy or the local planning policy setbacks to telecommunication facilities. So both of those are actually in the policy and state planning policy. Where our policy is deficient in respect to, compared with the state planning policies dealing with exemptions under the Commonwealth Telecommunications Act, and essentially these are what we call low impact facilities. So if you've got a low impact facility, then it doesn't technically require development approval. And the state planning policy sets out the process and identifies the relevant legislation that deals with that. Where both policies have similar provisions relates to the relationship of the policy to the Commonwealth telecommunication infrastructure. So the Telecommunication Act establishes the regulatory framework in dealing with these sorts of facilities. Looking at the assessment of visual impacts, both policies talk to this. This is one of the main measures that both policies deal with. So when looking at locations for telecommunications infrastructure, it's really important that whilst there's clearly might be a need for the facility because it might be in a black spot area or residents simply can't get appropriate services, the applicant needs to be mindful of the location these facilities are going to be located in. So in other words, if they're going to be located in an area of high scenic value, such as, for example, some of our areas are out through the Hills Orchard areas, the Bickley Valley, having communication towers that sort of may be a bit of a blight on the actual landscape. In those situations, it's unlikely that they would be supported. So both our policy and the SPP talks to those measures and the importance of addressing the visual requirements. In terms of advertising, both policies talk to a 21-day advertising requirement. With the current policy from the city, if this policy is revoked, the 21 days essentially is the time frame, but the city is open through its own policy dealing with advertising to undertake various other measures in dealing with or providing for advertising of the facility. So we can still have community information sessions, putting the details on the social media of the city, signage and the like. And finally, information to be submitted with the development application. Now, our policy is currently silent on this, whereas the SPP gives a fair bit of information. And that's what makes this last point really what makes the SPP a bit more robust than our local planning policy in dealing with these sorts of facilities. But in essence, it talks about the applicant having to demonstrate it meets the code of deployment, and that's generally dealing with demonstrating compliance with respect to electromagnetic emissions. Other requirements include things like the applicant providing a map showing where there are gaps in the area that clearly don't have that sort of coverage, so in other words, black spot areas. So just summarising that table, it's clearly evident that the SPP is as a state planning policy, something we should defer to when dealing with applications for telecommunication infrastructure. It's a far more robust policy and will address all the requirements that planners have to look at in terms of a planning application. So just moving on to the recommendation, obviously the recommendation is that the policy be revoked pursuant to the relevant planning legislation and including publishing a notice in the local newspaper circulating in the area in accordance with, again, the relevant legislation. Any questions?
I have a question. Wouldn't, in regards to the advertising, wouldn't that be maximum, instead of being maximum 21 days, wouldn't that be the minimum? Why would only 21 days be the maximum advertising time?
No, it is a maximum advertising period. Obviously, the state planning policy takes a position that 21 days is a sufficient period of time, and within that time, we can apply our own measures within that 21-day period. And as I said before, things like having community information sessions, obviously going out to affected residents within a certain radius, and the radius would be at our discretion, so it may be in the past up to 500 metres of a particular site. So our current policy only talked to 21 days as well.
Through the chair, I might just add further to that. Should a particular application have its own characteristics where there's key community concerns, which we've dealt with in the past, we could work with the applicant, work with the Planning Commission and the Department of Planning to try to obtain some extensions to those timeframes. There's nothing stopping us from working towards that. And through our experiences, if it is a particularly contentious location, or there's particular matters that need to be considered from a community or even technical perspective, we can work with those stakeholders to get extensions to those timeframes. Notwithstanding the state planning policy does state it's a maximum, there's scope for us to work towards extensions if needed and depending on the circumstances.
Yeah, thanks. I think you'll find that is the case. And what would be the minimum then? You might want to just advertise that for 7 days. And where would it be advertised? Just the local paper or social media or?
Yeah, through the chair, that's the state planning policy prescription, and where state planning policy and local planning policy conflict on a matter. So if we had a local planning policy that spoke to a longer period, the state planning policy would supersede that. So that's the period that's prescribed within the state planning policy, and beyond the city's sphere of influence to really influence, unless there's a review of that policy and we could provide a submission to that effect. But that's the current policy position. We would always lean towards the maximum, or if not, request an extension for further than the maximum.
Thank you. Any further questions from councillors? Councillor Ritchie.
Yes, I just had a couple of phone calls from residents who have some ongoing concerns, valid or otherwise, regarding 5G. So when an application comes to council for a telecommunications installation, does it ask what it's actually putting in? In other words, would we know if we were asked the question, if we have 5G in the city, where it would be?
Yeah, through the chair, look, they certainly give that level of information as part of the application. We need to understand they would include as whether it's 4G or 5G, but that information will be provided.
Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you. Andrew, the current planning policy, can you go back to the table, please, Andrew? Sorry. So the current planning policy provides for low impact facilities and says that a DA is not required. So how is the state planning policy different in regard to low impact?
Through the chair, the current policy is silent when it comes to, obviously, low impact facilities. So, but obviously in that situation we defer to the state planning policy, which exempts under the Telecommunication Act those sorts of facilities from requiring development approval.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions from councillors? Questions from the gallery? Nothing further. We'll move on to the next item. 10.2.1, Hale Road and Tonkin Highway Advocacy. Presentation by the manager, Doug Bartlett. Thanks. Andrew.
Good evening, councillors, staff and community. We're pleased to bring you a report on the outcome of correspondence with the Minister and the Main Roads WA. This is following a request through a notice of motion about the Tonkin Highway and Hale Road Interchange project. The notice of motion requests the Mayor and CEO to write to the Minister and Main Roads respectively, and we received letters in reply that are attached to the report. I've just included two very quick pictures here to refresh everyone's memory. The image on the left indicates the Tonkin Corridor project, which is the overall project Main Roads are working on. Includes lane increases on Tonkin Highway and upgrades to intersections including Hale, Welshpool and Kelvin roads. So as stated in the Minister's letter, 1.4 billion total project. The image on the right is still the current image based on the Main Roads project website of their proposed interchange concept, I should say. It hasn't been confirmed as yet for the Hale and Tonkin interchange. So in terms of the detail provided through the correspondence, the Minister raised significant issues in providing south-facing access. As noted there, a large impact on land, local residents, the A-Class Reserve alongside Mamba Road and the Veteran Car Club of WA. These would all, if proceeded with, cause significant delays in the project and impacts and cost increases. And impacts across a number of areas, including Aboriginal heritage and environment. The state is not intending to proceed with south-facing ramps. They've stated that explicitly in the letter, as have Main Roads WA. We've since received a draft traffic modelling report on the project. That is not yet have sufficient information to present further to Council. We're awaiting updates from Main Roads to clarify a number of points around that draft traffic model. However, it has provided some information about likely travel times and the details in the report. However, because in part to the way Hale and Tonkin intersection currently functions, and of course the large queues people may be familiar with at the Welshpool and Tonkin intersection, the report identifies reductions in travel time for all movements in all directions, whether you're living in the Wattle Grove area, the red sort of circle on the left, and trying to travel to the south, or if you're living in the Forestfield area, where that blue circle is, and trying to travel to the south. The changes in those intersections provide I guess, benefits for those residents on a general average basis. Resulting from this information, the City recommends that Council does not advocate further for inclusion of south-facing ramps, acknowledge the correspondence from the Minister and Main Roads, and seek some further clarification about the north-bound direction from Hale Road, as there wasn't a response to that in the letters. Are there any questions?
Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, Doug. Think I heard you say that the traffic modelling or the impact isn't completed. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Right. So, and I think I heard you say that the travel times would be reduced for all road users.
Yes, so road users travelling south, it's expected that road users travelling north would also be benefited. I don't recall the figures for the northbound traffic.
Okay. Do you expect that once the results of the traffic modelling comes in, that this would have an impact on your recommendation?
It's unlikely. It would actually provide more clarification for us around if there is significant enough impact on other local roads in the area, Arthur Road and Hartfield and so on, and whether those roads may need a bit of attention, which Main Roads has indicated they would be willing to provide or support through their project. The main information, the next level of modelling will advise is actually what the format of the Welshpool-Tonkin intersection should be. And that then actually provides greater certainty around those travel times.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Director.
Through the Chair, also one of the main issues that we've gone back to Main Roads on is our concerns regarding Lewis Road, Welshpool Road intersection. And they're quite aware that the City is concerned with the removal of the south-facing ramps, the impact upon that intersection, especially because of the geometry of it at the present time. So they're well aware that they need to respond succinctly and clearly to the City in that regard, whether or not an intersection upgrade is required.
Any further questions from councillors? Any questions from gallery? No further questions. We'll move on to the next item. 10.2.2. Street Verges Review of Service Standards, presentation by Rod Strang, Manager Parks and Environmental Services.
Thank you, councillors, city officers, members of the public. I'm Rod Strang, Manager Parks and Environmental Services, and tonight I'm presenting on the report of results from the 2019 Roadside Verge Maintenance Survey and also seeking council endorsement for actions regarding verges. By way of some background, at the 2018 Ordinary Council meeting, Council resolved to request that the CEO undertake a comprehensive review of parks and environmental services and request that the CEO present the results of the review to the March 2019 Ordinary Meeting of Council. A subsequent confidential report was provided to Council, and it was resolved that Council received the CEO's report into the 2019 review into the Parks and Environmental Services team, and 2, endorse the proposed service standards for verge management for the purpose of community consultation. And it's the second point that's essentially the subject of this evening. First, why does the city maintain road verges? It's done to manage risk or for safety reasons, and these issues are dealt with through a regulatory control framework as well as city policies and our bushfire management plan. Some road reserves have remnant vegetation that's been cleared in most other areas and so needs to be protected and conserved. The other main reason is for their appearance or amenity, and this is a subjective matter, I guess, and service levels are discretionary. The Community Consultation Survey, as requested by Council, was conducted from 1st August through the 21st October 2019. The outcomes of the survey are provided in detail as attachment 1 in the report, but by way of a brief summary, the survey was promoted on the city's online engagement platform. There was an advertisement in the Echo newspaper, and it was also distributed citywide via a letterbox drop. So it was very thoroughly circulated. A total of 638 surveys were received. The subsequent report drew the following conclusions. Nearly 90% of respondents maintain their own verge. Over 40% were dissatisfied with the standard of verges. Over 83% want different verge standards for different land uses, such as residential, industrial and rural type verges. Over 65% of respondents are concerned regarding the quality and quantity of verge maintenance. Only 25% of respondents are aware of the city's street tree planting program, and 35% would like more information about planting waterwise gardens. The city's verge maintenance service levels were reviewed in 2019. As part of the review, unkempt residential verges throughout the city were mowed by contractors twice in spring 2019 and again twice in 2020. This resulted in a significant downward trend in the number of requests for verge mowing for these years. Now the results up there. So in 2017-18 we got 364, and in 2018-19 the service level was, service of mowing residential verges was ceased, and the request for services spiked to 478. 2019-20, as we previously referred to, that's 374, it dropped down over 100, and in 2020-21, the last spring, dropped down further to 238, and that's as of February when the report was drafted, but we don't get too many between now and the end of the financial year, so that figure wouldn't go up by more than, say, 30 odd. So the trend's continuing down, which is good. The current level of service is fully resourced and seems to be generally acceptable to most of our community. This approach enables delivery of a clear and planned verge maintenance program. For the purpose of the report, roadside verges are classified as either high profile, residential, industrial, rural and conservation, each with their own site-specific requirements, as detailed in the chart there. There's approximately 1,200 kilometres of road verges throughout the city, and due to a variety of circumstances, there's occasions where some of the services are not practicable. such as the picture here. It's not really practical. This is a sort of a road side verge, typical of a rural situation, and we might go down a flat one with a tractor with a slasher mower or a flail, but due to the angle of the road verge and also the fact that there's a lot of gravel and rocks there, that will create problems with projectiles and also with undulations. If we had pedestrian maintainers out there, there will be issues with traffic management and things like that. So in a broad scale situation, it's not really economically viable or practical to have people out there with whippersnappers and the likes. And this is a similar situation, and the way that we would treat this particular verge is we need to maintain the integrity of the drain, the functionality of the roadside drain there, and we also need to make sure that weeds don't encroach into the road surface and break that up. So we would treat this verge here with herbicide, and we would spray from the paved edge to the rear of the drain. And we'd do that once, maybe twice per year. This is a verge that I mentioned before, like a conservation type reserve, and the remnant vegetation there is can be quite uncommon, quite rare, and we'd seek to preserve that. So the treatment in this situation would be just a small spray, about maybe 1 metre in, just from the corner, from the edge of the paved surface there, just to the rear of that little spoon drain on the side of the road, and we'll be careful not to allow any overspray to go over that vegetation. The fact that it's still there is testimony to the guys must be doing a reasonable job. This particular verge here is a residential verge, and we wouldn't normally service that. We wouldn't normally mow that because it appears that it's been developed at some point in time. There's evidence of the garden curbing there, and if you go closer, there's a bit of irrigation pipe on the grounds and some little plants and things. We've intervened previously and mowed those areas, and we've received claims and complaints, so it's not necessarily what that resident wants. So that's they can be problematic. Our level of service is consistent with other local government authorities as shown in the chart below. High-profile verges are those on main roads that form an entry into the city. Specials are usually requested at the discretion of the CEO. And fire mitigation reserves relates to verges near city-owned public open space, where the overall fire risk quantifies attention. Further consultation with other local government authorities has identified common themes, such as many local governments provide guidance in way of a policy or a local law as to permissible improvements that can be made to verges by the resident. All adopt the premise that the applicant accepts the ongoing responsibility to maintain these improvements. So the resident would maintain verges that they improve. Difficulties arise when properties are sold and the new owners don't want to maintain the improvements. So in summary, some residents are likely to continue to have high expectations of the city regarding what can realistically be achieved through a verge maintenance program. The changes to the verge mowing program since 2018-19 appear to have been well received within our community, and as shown by the example, reduction in customer requests for maintenance and are consistent with the level of service provided by the other local government authorities. The city's agreed service level standards may need to be more available to our community, and we may want to encourage residents to improve their verge areas. So the recommendation is resolve to maintain the current level of service inclusive of twice annual mowing of unkempt verges, and also develop more user-friendly policies and communications providing guidance for property owners wishing to improve the amenity of their verges or repurpose them for outcomes such as community gardens. Any questions, please?
Councillor O'Donnell.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, the figure of $60,000 for the twice annual mowing, so I'm assuming that would be $30,000 each time. Is that correct?
Yeah, with our current contractors, the price to mow unkempt residential verges is $30,000 per cut.
And so would that be pretty congruent with the 2019-20, which is 374 verges that was done?
No, we mowed all unkempt verges, and that figure is the amount of people who rung up requesting additional service, or we may not have got to them before they called in, so we'd give that advice that we're on our way and it's being mowed on a program basis.
Okay, so do we know the total of verges that we actually mow? Like, is it every single residential? And sorry, I'm just trying to figure out how much it actually costs per verge, if that makes sense.
Yeah. We didn't really know how many verges would need servicing, and if we responded as people called, then neighbours often called as well. So there was a lot of backwards. There was a lot of mobilisation, demobilisation, time wasted. So we decided to do the whole lot in a geographic way, and we outsourced it because we didn't have in-house capacity. We didn't have enough machines all in one hit when most of the flush of growth comes in spring, so we outsource that to contractors, and theoretically they're supposed to put in additional resources so that they can be done twice at the peak time. And we don't ask them to price per verge, we ask them for the actual whole program. Yeah.
Through the chair, we'll attempt to get some shape around the scale of how many verges they attend to as part of those cuts, and we'll report back.
I have a quick question. Oh, yeah. Go, John, you're first.
Rob, you mentioned the page 32E, only 25% of respondents are aware of the city street tree program. It's like you're the guy to ask. When I was the mayor, last year that I was the mayor, we allocated another 50 grand additionally to what we normally do to plant trees. Can you tell us roughly where these trees are being planted? Because it appears that not too many people know. Can you give us an idea?
There's a total of, I think, $165,000. So there was 115, and then the extra money was topped it up to 165. And those trees are planted all over the city. Recently we provided more accurate information, but I can't recall off the top of my head. Sorry, John.
Thank you. Through the chair, I can address that. Councillor O'Connor raised that as a question without notice at the last OCM. We have responded to that, so it will appear in the minutes of the Feb OCM, the actual areas where we've planted street trees this year.
Thank you.
Yes, my question was, you mentioned a callback service. Are you saying that if there was verges that were missed, there is a service for callback to come back and complete that verge?
We would prefer not to, but we may. They would fall under the umbrella of specials, where we, at the request of the CEO. Generally, if a verge is missed, it'll be for a reason like there might be an obstruction, there might be a vehicle on the verge, there might be some illegal dumping or something that precludes us from mowing that verge when we go through. And we will knock on the door and see if we can have the situation resolved there and then, but it's to respond is more difficult, but it can be done.
Quick follow-up on that. A verge that is an island is still considered part of the City of Kalamunda's verge, and would dead wood be collected from that verge?
An island would most probably be an area that we should maintain regularly anyway with our in-house teams, and so it should be on a maintenance program. And if there's like dead vegetation or wood or something laying around, it will be assessed. If it's obviously just fallen and died, we should take that away. But if it has some environmental benefit, we might think that it can stay.
Okay, thank you. I do have one of those verges that I've had residents ask about, so I will follow up with the city to see if those works can be carried out. Councillor Stallard.
Thank you. Yes, it depends on what type of deadwood you're talking about. The question I would have is that do we get any indication from the community about not understanding or not knowing what they can and can't do with the verges? Are we telling them that they can maintain them themselves? I can't remember reading it, so I'm just not sure what I have and haven't seen. But I mean, I remember fixing up a verge at my place and then a neighbour saying, "What are you doing? That's not yours. You shouldn't be touching it." And so there's confusion. Are we dealing with that? Is it still happening, or has that been diminished?
As far as maintenance goes, just general routine maintenance, we'd encourage that. Sometimes people take it upon themselves to prune their verge tree, and we discourage that, or some remnant vegetation that we might have a certain environmental value attached to that we'd prefer they didn't. So it does vary depending on a case-by-case basis. If they wish to develop the verge, then there's verge development guidelines available. So if there's any uncertainty, just contact the city and we'll make sure the right information's forthcoming.
Can I follow up? Sorry, follow-up question. The indication that I've seen is that some of the verge trees, like out in front of our place, there are some bottle brush, and some of the bottle brush I've just nipped the ends off, intending to help keep the shape and also to maintain the full growth and the full bloom. Yet the one up the road looks straggly and almost like it's in total need of a major haircut or a throat cut. But so I'm just wondering, is that encouraged, or as you said earlier, we shouldn't be touching those trees? If we're doing that, are we not then putting a greater impost on the city in the sense of having them, or try and get them to come out and do it?
Yeah, the city would really only manage the risk associated with the tree, not any inconvenience, and unless it is in quite a high profile area, maybe just a little bit the form as well. What you've described is, I think we would have a pragmatic approach to that. So if somebody rang and complained, then we would assess it and say, look, it's just, it's not an issue. But some people prune the tree to a stump, Jeff. So, you know, we need to view things on a case-by-case basis and be sort of pragmatic about it, yeah.
Councillor Boyd?
Yeah, thank you, through the chair. I'm just curious, given attachment 10.2.21, I'm just curious, given the suburb by suburb satisfaction versus dissatisfaction ratings, all but one of the suburbs, the dissatisfaction or dissatisfied or very dissatisfied outrates the satisfied or very satisfied. I'm just wondering, given that, on all suburbs except for, I think it's the rural, I'm just wondering, given that, why we're not seeking to expand this program, because it seems that the feedback from the community is that they're dissatisfied with the current program.
Yep, that was the feedback from the respondents, and the respondents were generally dissatisfied with the level of 40%, I think, were 80% were maintaining their own verges of the people that responded, and 40% of those were dissatisfied with the level of service. What I surmised is that it's the expectation of the people who are maintaining their verge that the city should be maintaining to a higher level. And since that survey, We've increased the level of service on the residential verges. We've mown them twice, and it seems to, and the requests for us to intervene have dropped off considerably. But the level of service is budget dependent, and if that's something that you guys might like to improve, then it can be done.
Through the chair, I might also add, we contrast that to the catalysed community surveys that are done every 2 years, which is a much more broader view of the community's feedback on a wide range of the services provided by the city. And if I refer you to paragraph 16, you can see the variance by suburb in those catalysed surveys in terms of satisfaction. And whilst on average, most people, it's 46, which is okay, there are some standout items, especially in High Wycombe and Wattle Grove, where there's a higher level of dissatisfaction as reflected by the lower scores. And as Rod has indicated, if council wishes to upgrade spending on improving amenity of these verges, we're quite happy to oblige.
Any further questions from councillors? Questions from the gallery? No further questions. We'll move on to item 10.2.3, Central Mall Streetscape Adoption of Concept Design.
Right.
Presentation by Director. You
Thanks.
present? Yep.
Well,
Brett Jackson.
Point store director.
Yes. At this point.
Thank you, through the chair. Good evening, councillors, members of the community. So the purpose of this report is to basically seek council endorsement to move forward through to the adoption of design, budget and construction of the Central Mall Streetscape Improvement Project. So I'll start first of all with responding to and outlining what we found in the community consultation phase. We received 108 responses. Generally speaking, as the attachment's there for each specific question, but generally speaking, the respondents were satisfied or very satisfied in which the draft concept plan met the criteria we set out. However, the community did tell us that it's still concerned with how we have addressed pedestrian safety issues, and they do not believe that a mixed pedestrian vehicle zone can exist, and whether or not the uniqueness of this place is properly developed. In response to that, empirical evidence of other streetscapes in successful mixed-use areas with much, much higher traffic volumes than planned for Central Mall do work. So it's a matter of, our position is that whilst the fears may be there, we think that the design and the outcomes from the specialists will overcome those fears in time. And the issues of storytelling will be improved through the detailed design phase. So this is the concept plan as it stands, as we consulted with the community. To recap, the general theme is a highly vegetated streetscape with no real traditional roadway, curb, footpath. It's one plane, as it were, with all the furnishings, the vegetation, the garden beds, etc., and the meandering traffic path to tell vehicles by their own nature that they just don't have a good hard run at this and that they're going to have to have a very low speed environment. The budget for this project, when council adopted the budget at original thing, what came to realisation, it was the footprint contained in the Streetscape Master Plan, which was adopted by council, was approximately 2,500 square metres, and that was only the road reserve of Central Mall. What we've found as we've progressed the design, that we probably need about 900 metres squared extra to just interface probably with the CADS theatre, and also to do door-to-door. What we mean by door-to-door is from the edge of the buildings facing Central Mall to the edge of the road reserve. Otherwise, it just wouldn't work as a design. So that increased the project area by about 36%. We've also included in the concept treating the shopping centre loading dock and its car park at this point in time, which is an extra 26% in area. So looking then on a budget, from a 2.4, the revised budget, excluding the loading dock, is $3.075 million. However, we do not propose to change our current funding from our rates and reserves. We will have access to extra funds from a Commonwealth grant to top up the budget. We've also spoken with the relevant shopping centre owner regarding whether or not the loading dock car park area, if they fund it, it continues. If not, we can take it out of scope. So the short recommendation is that we adopt the concept plan as shown as attachment 1 as the basis for finalising our design and tender documentation. Approve a budget of $3.2 million plus overheads if the shopping centre is contributing $125,000 to the project. If not, the budget is $3.075 million plus overheads, noting that there will be no change to the approved municipal funding for this project. We would recommend we receive the community engagement report and that we proceed to final design and can call construction tenders for the project. And we are recommending to keep this project ticking along in timeline, that once tenders are called, the Chief Executive Officer would consult and brief council on the outcomes of the construction tender, but necessarily have delegated authority to award a construction contract up to the value of $2.78 million, which is the current cost estimate of the construction contract plus contingency. So I might throw it to the councillors for any questions.
Any questions, councillors? I do have a question. Discussions with the shopping centre, where is the city up to with those discussions regarding that $125,000 outlay by them?
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Chair, for that question. The advice from the managing agent has been that the owners of the Australian shopping centres are based in Sydney. They have taken a very strong recommendation that these proceeds to Sydney. But anecdotally, he's not confident that the shopping centre owners will contribute. But he is pushing as well in parallel for an upgrade to the facade of the shopping centre. So we might get a facade outcome rather than a loading dock outcome, which I think would be a better outcome anyway for the project.
Is that the facade up this street, or the entire facade of the shopping centre?
The facade of the shopping centre in Central Mall.
Okay, thanks. Any further questions? Councillor Jardina?
Director, have we also, I know we've spoken to the guy that owns the old Mead Medical. Have we allocated funds in the event that we have to put a big screen so we blank off that building, that we don't see it, from our new concept plan or our new design or our new...
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, that has lot 14. You're referring to lot 14 on the drawing in front of you. As you can see, that part of the streetscape is heavily vegetated. So ideally over time, the growth will take over, but yes, we are looking at screening it if we have to during initial phases of the life of this project, because yes, yeah, I can deal with that one, because it is something that we were concerned about. Having said that, we have met the owners and have briefed them on this project, and there seems to be, there's a bit of a change in their thinking, and perhaps there may be some developments on foot for lot 14.
Any further questions from councillors or from the gallery? One, Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, Chair. Brett, just going back to the grant stimulus package, was that handed to the city, or do we have to apply for it?
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. The sequence of events for the Local Roads and Community Infrastructure Grant Scheme Phase 2 was that we received a letter from the Commonwealth saying, congratulations, you've just been given $2 million. Now you have to apply.
So, follow-up question. So, on a project base, case by case?
Yes, so we've clarified what projects would be covered by that scheme. It does not have to be one project, it can be a multiple of projects, and as we briefed councillors during the strategic retreat, we proposed a whole sequence of projects to go forward to be funded under that $2 million scheme.
Okay, thank you, that's fine.
Any questions from the gallery? Peter, I see your hands up. Come on down.
Through you, Chair, councillors, just like to ask Director Brett a few questions to broaden the base of what he's being saying. I made a submission about 6 pages at the end of this wad of stuff that is produced, but mine's much more, a lot to do with detail. However, the question I want to ask is, this seems to be, at the moment, a work still in progress. I believe, Brett, you've still got to meet with the operators of the markets. I think you're doing that on the 15th of March. And there are quite a number of the retailers surrounding the mall that haven't apparently been asked for an opinion on that. And one lady, in fact, is over here this evening, ladies and gentlemen. They've not been asked for an opinion on that, so I guess you've got a small group, but maybe just to look again at who's had the opportunity to input, seeing as they've put a lot of money aside for a lease for long term, they'd be very interested how this is going to go from their efficiency point of view. There seems to be, next question, there seems to be lots of opinion against opening this to Central Road through traffic, as you mentioned, albeit with lower speed limits. Have you actually, is that actually in your proposition at the moment that there should be a through road? Bearing in mind that, in fact, Central Road as it was through a through road, was closed to make this precinct exist. Now we're talking about opening it, albeit with lower speed limits, but there was a lot of negative opinion against that, and I can see that as I mentioned in my comments, that the substrate underneath what is there at the moment would be heavy enough to, if it's resurfaced over the top, to take vehicles if necessary. But is the essence of this proposal as you have it now, that it will have through traffic? That's the next question. My further question is the area adjacent to Mead Street, what's called the Southern Mall concept on the concept plan here. It's apparently still in dispute, as you've said. The large derelict building really, the effect of it spills over quite significantly into the footpaths. Just doesn't exist really. It's very messy. It'd be very difficult to actually just screen that. And I've spoken to the owners as well, and they're now talking about trying to let small sections of that building up. But it is semi-derelict. It's a mess. So it's a lot of work, I would suggest. And I wonder whether if that isn't satisfactory, and you can't reach an agreement with the Kalamunda Central Shopping Centre, you'd consider an alternative. First of all, that loses 30 parking bays. Now, I came into at 10:30 last weekend. I came into the city to actually go to the library, and there was not one parking bay available anywhere between what's it called, Stirk Street and the back of the Aldi Centre. So that means that's evidence that there is a shortage of parking bays already in Kalamunda, and of course it fluctuates quite a lot during the week. But these markets are very, very important to the economy, and it seems to me to lose 30 car parking bays is not really affordable. So that would be something to perhaps discuss a bit further with whomsoever you're talking to. I suggest personally that if you don't get an agreement with those people...
Pete, are we sticking with questions?
Yeah.
That's what Brett's writing down.
I know he's got them all, yeah.
Thank you.
If you don't get an agreement on that area there, that south area, I always felt that the area from the Cats Theatre down to Barber Street, which is fully used when the artisan markets are in operation, some work could be done on there. Particularly, I'm suggesting screening the car park behind that 4-storey building from one side and screening the other side, which is the back of the Haines Street.
Pete, we're trying to discuss Central Mall. So,
yeah.
Okay, no problem.
So it seems to me that that's been left off for consideration, and it does form an integral part of the use of that central area. The next question is, what is the timescale for resurfacing? Because some retailers seem to think that the markets would be removed for a lengthy period. Is that the intention? And then because obviously some of them are feeling that if it's out for some distance, they put out of business themselves. Shall I stop at that? I've got a couple of other small points, but...
Pete, would you be able to issue these in an email to Brett? I'm sure he would be happy to get back to you on the answers.
Yeah,
they're all good questions.
Just an amusing comment, but I mean, the location, on the location plan, number 6 of the northern end, it shows on the concept plan, a sun lounge lawn. That's interesting, a sun lounge, because it's largely covered with shaded trees. And security, and I think this is going to cost the council...
Pete, we need to move on to the next item.
Yeah, the council is going to commit themselves to an extremely high maintenance cost project in the longer term.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Forrest. Okay, where we might start in our response is I'm going to throw to Peter Varelas, the Director of Development Services, because we've been through the history of the Kalamunda Activity Centre Plan quite a while, and how the Streetscape Master Plan had been adopted by Council, including the issues of road opening. So, Peter, if you want to just summarise and reflect on those, please.
Through the Chair, in a nutshell, through the Activity Centre Plan process, we posed the idea of opening Central Mall to one-way traffic, and the key reason behind that is that the pedestrian mall at the moment, in its current form, while very lively on market days and the like, does not service or provide significant activity during non-market days and during the week. It's quite limited, and the reason for that is from an urban design perspective and from a placemaking perspective, the area doesn't have the right recipe for a closed pedestrian mall. Closed pedestrian malls operate from an urban design and placemaking and planning perspective in areas that have a high residential population in the town centre, which Kalamunda doesn't have, and has a high number of workforce during the week in the town centre, which Kalamunda doesn't have. Examples of where we do have pedestrian malls that work during the week and the like are Hay Street Mall, Murray Street Mall in the city, which have a high resident population and a high workforce population in a concentrated area. Kalamunda simply doesn't have those recipes, those ingredients to make up the recipe, and on that basis it's been proposed to open the mall. Interestingly, in the 80s, and those that lived in Kalamunda during that time would remember that this mall was actually open to two-way traffic back in that time, and provided a noteworthy link between Haines and Mead Street. But in short, doesn't have the right recipe for a pedestrian mall, and for some of the reasons, feedback we've received from business owners and safety and the like, we're looking at opening up and revitalising Central Mall through this concept.
Thank you, Mr. Varelas. Thank you. So now I'll just talk through some of the issues you've raised, Mr. Forrest. Is the road going to be open? Is that the proposition? Yes, it is. Is it going to be low speed? We're trying to target a 15k per hour posted speed limit. We've already got data to support that the speeds achieved in that area at the moment, with people coming from Haynes down to Nesta Brae or Mead through to the loading dock area, are well below that anyway. So even with the roads that are built at the moment, which look like roads, the vehicles are travelling very slow. And with this built form, it will be even slower. In terms of the proposal, it's natural, it's how construction documentation grows. You start with a concept plan, you form it up to detailed design, and you form it up then to construction documentation. They're the stages that we go through tonight. We've got the concept plan as adopted for the basis of moving forward to finalise and complete the designs on the general theming attached. I think we have addressed the issue about trying to make lot 14 hide, for want of a term, and to improve that, and we will be doing our damnedest to do that as well. I just want to clarify a word about resurfacing. I would take that as the intent was to lay asphalt down. This is far from the actual outcome will be pavers, so it's going to be lifting everything up and putting pavers back down. Parking bays and the shortage, well, that was addressed through the adoption of the activity centre plan. We do note, and I don't know if you're aware of that, but all those bays that currently exist opposite lot 14, by and large, they're used by staff at the shopping centre all day, every day. You can't usually find, there's only 1 or 2 bays that pop up for casual parking. And finally, the issue of the from the CADS Theatre down to Barbara Street. As you may recall from the activity centre plan, we have each part of the streetscape master plan broken up into distinct packages or future projects, of which that is the gardens is one future works to be considered by council down the track. So then to close off the issue about consultation with the markets, what we did late last year, is we sought expressions from business owners and property owners in Central Mall to work with the city on what was called an operational reference group, to also be attended by our designers and a potential builder to give us some advice about constructability. The Mayor is also part of that group. When we received we did not receive more than business owners that are presently on that group. Everyone who submitted a proposal is on the group, which is where we communicate through to them at the present time. And Nicole, of course, is pivotal to our ongoing communication strategy, both when just prior to works and when works start. In terms of the markets, we are creating a separate working group with the market operators, with Mandy Skates here tonight, and that will be kicking off soon. It's got two aims, is to start talking through to finalise design outcomes so that the markets are facilitated in Central Mall and the CADS area, and secondly to work through the construction issues and the market issues during the construction phase of the project. I can't give anyone an answer yet or what that's going to look like until we start the work, start planning on that regard.
Thank you. Any further questions from the gallery? If you could just state your name. In between, we'll have a quick question from Councillor Cannon. No. Go first, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, councillors. Roger Everson from the Micro Collective. My key point is the construction period, being August to 2021 through to January 22. Just what has the council sort of looked at? That's the peak period for retail and the impact that will actually have on businesses in the area. Already some are mentioning that they won't survive. How was this period sort of decided upon, and what are the chances of that being pushed back to like after the Christmas period, so it's less of an impact? I'd like to also hasten to add that we are not opposed to the plan. The more traffic flow would be beneficial. The other one is business hours on doors. I don't know if the council has any standing on businesses down there don't really have hours on their doors, which obviously no one's likely to show up to go to the centre when people don't have hours on because they don't know if they're going to be open or closed. So is that something that the Shire has standing on as far as business hours? No, there's nothing. All right. What else have I got? No, that's
However,
pretty
sir,
much
we
it.
can encourage owners to do that if that's beneficial to business and customers. It's certainly something our economic development team can speak to business owners about to see if they want to do it, but we can't impose it.
Yeah. That's all.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'll answer your first question about the construction impacts. Whilst we have in the report set out the extent of the construction period, what we're doing is we've consulted with a potential supplier, and we've walked through in a workshop mode, well, how could this be built so that every shop front, every door is accessible by customers at every stage. So we're not proposing, and it's a workable solution that we do not block any shop front door during trading hours. So it's a way we're going to do the jigsawing of the works, and they'll be moving in stages along the road from Mead through to Haynes through to Mead in terms of breaking it into sub-elements. And I can't give you the exact answers of when and where at this point in time. It'll be after we get the construction tenders back and we get the programs resolved with the builder.
So are those start and finish times going to be reviewed at some point, or are they still, they're set in stone?
It would be a decision for council if they wanted to delay this project.
Question from Councillor Thomas.
I don't know how to turn this into a question, but I just wanted to say that we had the guy come and talk to us and showed us the little sections and the doors, and it was really very clever. And I think while you think that your businesses will be disrupted, it won't be as bad as you think.
Councillor Cannon, did you have a question? No. Councillor Giardina.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think it's very important that you do liaise with the officers at any time that there's a problem. You know, our guys are always here. If you find that there's an issue that's bothering you or your business, please contact our director, and they'll try to help you out.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Roger. No further questions. We'll move on to the next item. Councillor Cannon.
Yeah, hi, thank you. In the attachments of the survey key findings, on the bottom it's got 27% of respondents were very dissatisfied with the concept plan, followed by 24% who were satisfied and 23% who were dissatisfied. Is there something not right there?
I'm happy to take that on notice.
Okay, and just a second question. Of the community engagement that we had between October and November 2020, do we know how many people actually attended, considering there's only 108 responses?
When you say how many people attended, so what the community, what was undertaken as a part of community engagement included workshops and then survey responses.
Face-to-face, yeah.
Yeah, so the total number, are you asking me what the total number of interactions would be?
Yeah.
Look, we could give some summaries of that, but there's a large number of interactions that don't always result in submissions. So they're conversations where people are just asking questions and then they get the answers and they kind of go along. So that would involve like staff spent a period of time in the shopping centres, they spent time on Central Mall actually chatting to people. So what we tend to give you is the number of actual responses that come back. So the kind of hard data that is feedback rather than every single interaction, because they're much more estimates in comparison.
And sorry, that's from the community of how many people do we actually have in our city? Estimately, sorry, just on a...
My understanding is the City of Kalamunda has approximately 60,000 residents.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillors, gallery, we'll move on to the next item. Confidential item 10.2.4, which is confidential. There'll be no open presentation. It is in regards to the Carob Tree Place drainage investigations. There is a member from the gallery, Matthew Davey, who's going to speak on it. If you can come up. Thanks, Matthew.
Thank you, councillors. So my name's Matthew Davey and I reside on Carob Tree Place in Lesmurdie. I'd just like to give a brief timeline because there's been several councillors that have changed over the years. I'm sure some people are unfamiliar with this and the history of it. So there's 4 significant dates in this timeline. I'll bring up August 2017, which was 3.5 years ago. That was when it first started. That was when the email was first sent to City of Kalamunda by me, representing numerous residents in regards to this issue. From August 2017, approximately 18 months of discussions and meetings occurred, which brought us to April of 2019. That's when we had the ordinary council meeting, where a motion was put forward to fund a study and recommend some options. That vote was carried unanimously by council. Following that was only a few months later in June of 2019, independent consultants began their investigation on site across 9 properties that they identified. Further to that, November 2019, that was when individual meetings were held between City of Kalamunda staff and the residents to discuss those recommendations from the consultants. And these were expected to be presented to council within the coming months after that meeting. So that was November 19. So we're now into March 21 and something is being tabled. Unfortunately, this is confidential, so none of us know what it is or what's being discussed. So none of us can ask any questions about it. But what I'd like to do is open my door to any councillors who would like to discuss it and ask me any questions over the next few weeks. Please get in touch. If you want to speak to the other residents as well, they'll be more than happy to talk to you. But our doors are open to have a chat and go from there. So thank you for your time this evening. It's pretty quick and short. So.
Thanks, Matthew. There is no further questions on that as it is confidential, and we'll move on to the next item. 10.2.5, Kalamunda History Village Tree Assessments. Brett is going to give us a presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair, good evening again, everyone. Okay, the purpose of this report is to report on a recommended course of action regarding the disposition of 3 trees within the Kalamunda History Village. 3 trees of concern were raised by the Historical Society who manage the History Village on behalf of the city. We've had a qualified and well-recognised arborist assess the trees and provide recommendations to the report to the city. The arborist has concluded that if the city undertook some intervention on the trees and other works subject to a 3rd tree, it wouldn't be necessary to remove these trees. They're in fair to good health. We've had to balance his recommendation conclusions into sort of latent risk of tree collapse and the ensuing issues that result from that. So if we talk about tree number 1, it's a Northern River red gum. It's an introduced species, so it's not native to Western Australia. It's actually very close to the tractor shed roof, and the arborist has noted that it is likely to hit the roof in high winds. He said to resolve this, it would be necessary to cut back the roof of the tractor shed. The tree is assessed as being in good, Julie. The tree is assessed as being in good condition. So the recommended remedial works is just dealing with the crowns and limbs. It's about $3,300. We don't have a cost, nor are we going there to look at modifying the tractor shed. And as a contrast, tree removal is about $43.60. Our recommendation is that tree is removed. Tree number 2 is a Tasmanian blue gum, again an introduced species. It's in proximity to the train platform. This tree is being assessed as being in fair condition. However, the remedial action involves putting some fairly substantial braces in amongst the tree canopy, which is going to, and some other crown works, of course. So the issue would be an ongoing one-off cost of about $4,400 to get it set up, and then we'd probably have $1,500 annually in just keeping our eye on it and doing necessary adjustments, compared again to the tree removal at $43.60. Our recommendation is that that tree be removed. Tree number 3 is a marri. It's a native, it's significantly large and it's very mature. It has been noted its proximity to the toilets, which is a concern of the society. The tree itself probably needs the largest amount of intervention. The bracing we talked about for tree number 2 is also necessary for this tree, but moreover there's some canker and fungal treatment is required to keep the tree retained. So the one-off cost is about $6,000 plus $2,400 of annual, and the tree removal again in contrast is $43.60. We are recommending that we retain that tree because of its significance and native status. So our recommendation is approve the removal of the Northern River and the Tassie Blue gums, undertake the remediation of the marri, and undertake these actions as a matter of priority.
Any questions from councillors? Councillor Thomas and then Councillor O'Donnell.
Is there any thought to putting in new trees when we do remove them?
Thank you. Through the Chair, we will consult with the Historical Society in a replanting program. Obviously, we don't want to, for our future generation, renew the problem for them.
Councillor O'Donnell.
Thank you. At the start of your talk, you talked about the issue of, I forget what the word you said, tree fall over or something, but it actually, the report suggests that the arborist says that with the works, the trees will be structurally safe and sound. So I'm a little bit lost about that comment.
Thank you, Councillor. Through the Chair, the arborist's recommendation is the trees can be retained, and he's assessed them between fair and good condition. But trees are living creatures. They can fall down through other circumstances as they get older. So he has not recommended that they be removed for imminent danger of collapse.
Councillor Giardina.
Brett, the marri tree, it's next to the toilet block.
Yep.
Is there anything else underneath it that is probably of more value than a toilet block that we cannot replace if this thing comes down? Is there any other buildings that are...
Councillor, you're asking a hypothetical which way it falls. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
I'll just have to go and have a look. It's all fine.
If it falls, which way will it fall?
Councillor Cooper.
Just a question for the director there, please. I was just doing a little bit of research on canker fungal in marri trees. And according to a Murdoch University research paper, it said that once canker symptoms are evident, trees do not appear to be able to recover. Has that been looked into? Because are we saving a tree that is potentially not going to make it? And considering that we're looking at almost 2,400 annual cost for inspection and bracing. I don't like to see trees go, but I just want to make sure that...
Thank you, Councillor. Through the Chair, we'll do some further research with the arborist and get you some commentary on that.
We have a person in the gallery, Jenny Lewis. Could Jenny please speak on this item? Thank you.
Thanks, councillors and the public. My name is Jenny Lewis. I'm president of the Historical Society, managers of History Village and Sturt Cottage for 50 years this year. Tony Crowder, the vice president, is behind me, and the museum officer. Although we're historians, we haven't been there quite 50 years, but it's not a bad record. I wanted to address the issue of the trees, again, sort of recalling a bit of the history, the trees in History Village, and some of this you will have seen in your report, but I'd like to give a bit of background from our point of view. In August last year, the Society brought to the attention of the city the large 3-trunked marri tree on the fence line at History Village, pointing out that we thought there was a real problem with it and that it was in danger of falling. The city acted on this, and despite the report to the city by the engaged arborists who recommended canopy pruning only, the 3 parts of the tree fell on the weekend of January the 9th and 10th. The first 2 trunks badly damaged the post office, actually bisecting it, and some of the saw pit. The 3rd trunk fell the next night on the 1921 Chambers house, damaging the front of the building. And could I just do a little correction to your report here? On page 86.5, that house has nothing to do with Shire Chambers or anything of that nature. It was called Chambers House because it was built by Mr. Chambers for his family, and particularly for his one of his daughters, Ethel Chambers, who was the first postmistress in the official post office in Kalamunda. So it became Chambers House in the village, and that house was set up to reflect guest houses of the 1930s. Is that okay?
Thank you, Jenny, for drawing that to my attention.
That's okay. Incidentally, she was a career woman in the post office in 1921, so it's pretty good that Kalamunda had a woman as a career postmistress, as the first official postmistress. I'm giving you a history lesson here, I can't help it. Okay, because these trees fell at night, at midnight we got the call, no one was injured, but if they had fallen 12 hours before or 15, we would have had visitors in the village. So it's been a real kind of gut-wrenching thing for us in many ways, not just the loss of or partial loss of the buildings, but also the potential disaster that it could have been. I have to say that inspection of the stump afterwards showed that there was rot in that tree. Now, as Brett says, we've been concerned for some time about other trees in the village, including that other big marri on the fence line, the one behind the toilets. And we're not experts, but when we look at that one, we think, there's similarities here with the one that fell. There's a lot of bark falling off, cuts exuding red gum, termite damage, and as Councillor Cooper suggested, I researched as well, and marris do have a fungus, and Murdoch has been researching them. So I think it's worth looking at that, I agree. I understand the city has used the same arborist, and I've heard that the arborist is the expert. And so the arborist would have given a report on the first tree, and it might be worthwhile, I think, for councillors perhaps to look at that report and then look at this current report and do perhaps a comparison of the two, because this report says that the tree is 95% healthy, the trunk, sorry, is 95% healthy. So it'd be interesting to see what he has said about the trunk and the other tree when that report came out. Would be very interesting, I think, to see that. Now, the society is concerned for safety. We don't like to see trees go either. I've grown up in the hills, like so many of you. But we have something like 13,000 visitors a year through the village, 7,000 school children. You have to think of the risk assessment to all of that. And really, someone asked Brett about the buildings. I think if that tree went, we'd probably lose 4. The toilets, the Chambers House partly again, the blacksmith shed and possibly Ellis Cottage, part of it. I don't know whether the volunteers would have the energy or the desire to rebuild. I honestly don't. They may, I don't know. Putting Chambers House back together, just to give you an idea, the building was done, fantastic, but it took, we've calculated 500 hours to wash everything in that building, cutlery, textiles, crockery, ornaments, all the rest of the stuff to put back in the building. So you can see that it's a huge amount of volunteer work as well that something like this has caused. So if the council decides to keep the Marri with simply canopy pruning, I notice in the report it says 1 metre or 2 metre canopy pruning. That's not really very much. So maybe that could be queried as well. That's not even 6 feet, is it? Something like that. And it's a big, big tree. And even if that happens, the trunks are still, 3 of them, very close to the buildings. And if they fell, they'd take out the buildings. So we're very much in favour of some bracing, if that's what the city decides, some kind of bracing of the tree. And also we would very much encourage that another inspection should occur in 12 months just to see what's happening to that tree, because it obviously has some problems. Even the arborist has suggested that as well. And that canker is a question mark, I think. Someone also mentioned about replanting, and we really want to replant. We're happy to see the Tasmanian blue and the other one go, but we want something planted there. In our own area, really, you've only got the Jarrah and the Marri. They're the only 2 big trees. So we'd have to be looking outside the Shire to some. You've got things like Corymbia ficifolias planted around those sort of trees. I don't know, you're the experts with that, but we would love to see something planted, Brett, before the winter, this winter, so that something could get going. Also, where the other one fell, that's a big gap now, and it'd be good to get something planted there. And I'm sure the community would appreciate that as well. So just in summary, because I've been talking a bit, either that the Marri tree be removed or pruned and braced and looked at in another 12 months. I know this is more expensive, but yeah. That the 2 native trees, non-native trees be removed, and that replantings of appropriate trees occur this winter. That's basically how we're feeling at the moment.
Thanks, Jenny. That's great. Councillor Thomas.
Jenny, how do you think the community will feel if we decided to remove the Marri, which is a native, as well as the other 2? How do you think they would respond?
It's hard to know, isn't it? But if you'd been up there, as we have a lot, the number of people that stopped and took photos of those 2 buildings and the disaster that happened to them. So it went out there into the community. And as you know, 2 other trees fell in Williams Road, one in the ambulance car park and one across the road from the library, I think people, perhaps, Margaret, I don't know, but I think perhaps they might think, perhaps they do need to do something here because we've got an example of what's happened. That's the thing, isn't it? That you've actually got it in front of your eyes, what happened. Hard to know.
Thank you. Any further
If
questions,
I
comments?
may respond to Jenny. Thank you, Jenny. In the slide deck I provided was a very quick summary of the whole report. I would refer you to item 18 in the report, which talks about if we are retaining the MARI, the extent of works required, including the annual re-inspection. So it was part of the adopted process if we kept the tree.
Yeah, that's good to hear.
Any further questions, comments from the gallery? Councillors, thank you very much, Jenny, and thank you, Tony, for your services to the History Village over the years. It's appreciated. It's a wonderful spot. Item 10.3.1, Southwest Native Title Settlement. Presentation by Alida. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors, staff and community. So we have one report from the Corporate Services Directorate for you today. It is the Southwest Native Title Settlement. The City of Kalamunda comments on the land-based consultation for the Land List 1177. The purpose of this report is to consider the City of Kalamunda's response to the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage regarding lands identified by the state government for possible transfer to the Noongar people as part of the Southwest Native Title Settlement. They have identified 3 separate lots and we'll be discussing those tonight, as is detailed in the report. So the state of Western Australia has committed to allocating up to 32,000 hectares of Crown land to the Noongar people to create the Noongar Land Estate. So the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage then do an assessment and identification process to identify parcels of land, and they then contact those relevant agencies to get their comments. On the 19th of November 2020, the department sent an email to the city requesting our comments on these 3 relevant sites. The first site is Lot 178, Lonbrook Road West in Wollaston. It is approximately 1.2 hectares with a frontage to Lonbrook and Grove Road. It is zoned low density R10 residential. Being R10 zoning could provide for subdivision and development subject to the approval from council. There is also to note that there is a truncation on the southern end which would need to be dealt with before that land can be transferred. The next one is Lot 301, Lonbrook Road West, Wollaston. It is approximately 1.1 hectares of unallocated Crown land, and as with the previous lot, it is zoned R10 residential, which means that it would allow for subdivisions of approximately 1,000 square metre lots, subject to approval. This lot is adjacent to the Les Murdy Club, and the land is managed by the Scouts Association. The third lot is Lot 98, Windsor Road, Kalamunda. This lot is reserved, identified for the purpose of government requirements, which means that this site is managed by the state government. It is 3.5 hectares with frontage to Windsor Road. It is zoned low density R5, which is characterised by approximately 2,000 square metre lots, subject to approval under the local planning policy. In short, our recommendation is that in principle we support the transfer of these 3 sites. However, as part of attachment 2 to the report, there were some items that we have specifically noted. The sites are to consider to contribute towards the amenity of the area and the residents. The city has identified potential environmental values on these sites. the clearing of the sites for residential purposes would not be consistent with the objectives of the draft urban forest strategy. And finally, it is desire of council to retain these sites as open space. Any questions?
Any questions, councillors? Councillor Ritchie.
I have 3 questions. I noted that the timeline was December for our response, and I noted that we asked for an extension. Do we have the date for when that extension is, please?
If I can refer that to Chris Lodge, please.
Through the chair, they haven't given us a definitive date, but we've asked for at least until after council is resolved on the matter.
Thank you. Secondly, are they the only lots across the whole city which we are being asked to make a comment on? Is that it?
That's correct at this stage, yes.
Okay. And thirdly, once the transfer to the Noongar estate has been approved, what land uses can be put on them, or is the intent that they would stay as remnant bush?
Through the chair, the zoning, as the leader's alluded to, is residential for these 3 sites. 2 of the sites are identified as with a density of R10 and the other on Windsor Road R5. The planning system would enable applications to be considered for residential subdivision on these sites. If the Noongar people chose to take that course, through that planning process, a number of considerations become assessed. Environmental considerations. The city would likely request that flora investigations, flora and fauna investigations are undertaken through that process. We'd have to consider our policy positions, both the city and the state government. And yes, in short, it would provide for residential development, that residential land use.
Any further questions from councillors or the gallery? No further questions. One more from Councillor Ritchie.
My apologies. So if the land is vested in the Noongar estate, does that imply it can be sold? So it can be sold?
Based on my conversations with officers at the state government, yes, it does.
Developed.
Sold and developed.
Thank you. We'll move on to item 10.4.1, Customer Service Results 2020, presentation by Nicole O'Neill.
Thank you very much, councillors. So you'll all be accustomed with customer service results, and I'm very conscious of the time of night. 2020 does present some interesting opportunities for us, because I'm going to give you a bit of a 4-year review in the results, which you've probably noticed too, because we started the current customer service strategy in 2017, and the current strategy is due for completion this year in 2021. So of course there's a number of strategic planning alignments, and the purpose of the original strategy was to bring together an ongoing program of initiatives that were focused on continually improving the customer service experience. And so today is really about showcasing the results that we have achieved to date. We have a customer service ethos that's been focused on cultural change across the entire business, on process improvement, technological improvements, and also a more centralised service model. So we're really looking to encourage self-service as much as possible, but also to enable single point of inquiry results where we can. So actually when somebody calls up, to be able to give them a response on the spot rather than need to refer wherever we can. Of course, there are cases where referrals are required. And ultimately, the true ethos of that promise is that all of our interactions with our customers will be both timely and meaningful. So just quickly, the 2020 data, I think I can remember in 2019 saying we had some really good results and I wasn't sure if we can improve on them. And I was really pleased to say that we did. And it is a credit to the entire organisation. So the average response time across all of our requests was 0.28 days. And that's pretty phenomenal, because that won't include where it's just a phone call and it's dealt with at the time. That actually wouldn't be covered in the current stats, because that would only be where an ICS had actually been been created, so something had to happen. So in actual fact, that wouldn't include calls where we were just able to provide some information and the customer went on their day. And 99.58% of those requests were completed in 7 days or less. Some of the top 10, obviously, they haven't really changed a lot over the time. The dogs, we get a lot of dog inquiries, whether it's dog barking, dog exercise areas, there's a new one of those coming. You know, building maintenance type requests continue to be very common. Our calls also continue to be very consistent throughout the day, so it doesn't really matter if it's the first thing in the morning or into the afternoon. Our calls are relatively consistent. They're a little bit more of a spike usually in the mornings. We still get a lot of calls for Cleanaway. We've done a lot of kind of work in that space, obviously, in terms of encouraging people to be able to order skip bins online and that type of thing. But there's things like missed services, or people want to follow up, or they need to get a new bin, and they do just tend to call the City of Kalamunda first. So there's a lot of calls for Cleanaway as one of the #1 calls there that we receive. We do measure with our call recording, which was something that came in a little bit later in the space. We measure the average and the longest wait times because although we've seen significant improvements, there are still times that the current phone system does reach capacity. And if that happens, then we can see wait times increase, like if there's a number of people that are on the line awaiting responses. And ultimately, the true way to deal with that is to move towards something like a call centre style model. Why do customers call us? That's a really busy pie graph, I know, but it's just showing, I guess, the diversity of what it is that local government does, because we get contacted for a wide range of things, but some of the top 10 categories are up there in relation to trees, which we heard a little bit about tonight. Zoning certificate requests, there's been a massive jump in those, particularly recently. So a zoning certificate request is when there's a sale of a property, and of course the council has a role to play there. Dogs wandering, dogs prohibited areas, exercise areas, building maintenance requests, front counter requests, and the like. Now, when we look at our call tags, so this is for our call recording specifically, I've also given you some data there around what our calls were tagged for, because we're always interested to see why did somebody have to call us and could we help them to provide more information up front so that perhaps they may not need to. It may not always be the case, but Cleanaway rates inquiries, development applications, building inquiries, pool and pool barrier queries, noise complaints, private vegetation, dog and cat barking, and planning general inquiries were some of the top tags for 2020. And of course, I expect to see some of those trends continue in 2021 because we've heard the data around some of the planning and the building requests that are coming through the system. So just really quickly, we obviously have been ensuring that we've got really strong data for council to consider over a number of years now, because it was something that we did find there wasn't a lot of comparable data. So we have provided you with some overviews within the report in relation to improvements over time and what the results look like. So 2019, 0.61 days, average response time across all the requests. We again saw improvement and we managed to get that down to 0.28 days across those requests. We've tracked for you within the report the customer requests by year, just to see how the numbers vary and are those things kind of relatively consistent. We've also looked at the volume of requests received in 19 and 20, and that was interesting because we did actually, whilst we managed to see improved response times, we also saw an increase in volume of requests. So I think that's even more a credit to the organisation because actually we took more requests and we dealt with them more efficiently. The average response time in days per month, generally speaking, was lower across most of the months, and keeping in mind, of course, that we did also just see that the time or the number of requests also did increase in 2020. And that is the end of my little presentation to you, unless there's any questions for me.
Councillor Ritchie.
Thanks, Nicole. Just one, I noticed the main one is the Cleanaway. Do we answer the request or do we just flick them to Cleanaway?
Generally speaking, it would be a referral. Not in all cases. There are some cases where we will actually get involved, and particularly if it's a complaint, then that will trigger our complaints kind of resolution, and so then we would take those details on board.
Councillor Thomas.
What is banner frame hire?
Banner frame hire they're the community posts that are available at a number of the parks and the like. So there's some at Hartfield Park, in Forestfield, Fleming Reserve, in High Wycombe, Bilshaw Park in Wollaston, Stirk Park. So that's what a banner frame hire request is.
Anything further from councillors? Councillor Boyd.
Yeah, thank you. Nick, you might have said it. Does this data include the inquiries at email address, which says 14 days to respond?
Not necessarily. So this is a really interesting one, and it's one that I think as an organisation will only ever truly resolve with the implementation of a customer relationship management system. It will include, the data is where it is converted to a request. So if it's just a response to something, then that may not generate what we call an ICS, which is the customer request system. So it is more, the data is looking at your calls, and it's also looking at where there is a request. So it may not capture every single email interaction that occurs within the business.
Any further questions, councillors, or from the gallery? Thank you very much, Nick. It's great service. Just a quick note before closure of the meeting, this has not been live streamed. Thank you to Councillor Boyd who brought that to our attention. And that is close of meeting at 8:45. What was that? Yes, once we clear the gallery.